Welcome to City Life and welcome to this very special episode, this Queen's Birthday Special. City Life has been going for just 5 weeks now, but over that time we've had over 200 interviews on this couch. So today we bring you the best of City Life. First up, the newly appointed CEO of CERA, Roger Sutton. Now I've got to say, the support for you has been overwhelming. Was this a surprise?
Yeah, the amount of support has been quite humbling, really. I'm very keen to do the job and to go into the job feeling that people actually really want you to succeed and people are behind you. It's going to make it a lot easier.
Now, everyone else thinks you're the right person for the role. What makes you the right person for the role, in your mind?
I guess I am a Christchurch person. I'm very keen to see a really good quality rebuild. I'm an engineer. I've got links with a lot of the key people around the town. And hopefully I can bring these communities together. I mean, I really see this job as much as anything as trying to make sure communities have got the resources they need so they can actually work out what they need to do and then they can get those things done.
Tell me about the process that you went through to get this position.
I wasn't actually initially going to apply, and then various people started ringing me saying I should actually apply. And then the headhunter, who the State Services Commission, who are the formal employer, he rang me and said he'd just like a chat. And I still wasn't sure at that stage, and I agreed to have a chat. And these people are much more salesmen, really, than employer and people who... Anyway, he sold me. He sold me on it. I had a long series of different interviews with a lot of different people. And then about a week before the announcement, the head of the State Services Commission rang me and said I was the chosen one.
And what was it like to be the chosen one?
I felt apprehensive. But also really excited. And since then I've talked to a lot more people, and a lot more people have given me a lot more ideas about how I'm going to do this job really well. I'm really looking forward to getting into it in about a month's time. So
what do you think CERA's role is now in Christchurch and then in the longer term?
Well, CERA right now has already been established. There's already an acting chief executive who's doing a great job, John Gumbley. He's got about 40 or 50 people in an office in Papanui. And initially our job is trying to sort out things like the land issues. You know, there's a lot of people in this city who don't know whether they're going to be able to rebuild their houses. So the land issues. We're in charge of the demolitions. We've got an oversight in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the water, the sewage and the roads. So we've got some very, very big issues to get our mind around to begin with. The CBD, those issues are actually very clearly the City Council's brief. So we've got an overall role at the moment of getting some of those big issues sorted out so we can start working out how we can get the city really moving again. What happens with your role at Orion? I step down from that role in about 3 weeks' time. Okay. One of the existing directors, a guy called Jeff Vasey's going to step up and do that job in an acting role while someone's permanent is appointed. Jeff's a really good appointment. He used to run the ports of Auckland, so he's not a Cantabrian, but I mean he knows about how to run businesses like Orion, so it's going to be in safe hands. Okay, so in 3 weeks' time, what's first on your agenda? The land issues? Well, I mean, in terms of the land issues, is the biggest issue for the organisation. But my first issue is also just going to making sure I get to know the people that are within CERA, working out who else we need, and then really talking to the other people, the other stakeholders around town, the other leaders, to make sure I understand what they think the issues I need to be focusing on are. Okay. And how important do you think it is to keep people in Christchurch involved in the CERA process? I think it's very important. And I think it's really important we communicate to them. We communicate with them really honestly about what's happening, the timeframes by which things are going to be done. We set ourselves some milestones. And those milestones should be real milestones. I don't want sort of namby-pamby, we're going to achieve them. You know, we've got to actually put some real milestones out there that we're going to try and achieve. And some of them we won't achieve, but then we've got to be front up and be honest about why we haven't got there as well. You know, I think most people understand that there's a massive, massive job to be done here. But I think a lot of people also, I was at the Expo over the weekend, a lot of people, in fact everybody I met at the Expo, sees this as an opportunity. An opportunity to build this city a lot better than it was. But I think, we can talk about that, but initially there's a lot of people's lives who are really broken at the moment. People whose houses are on land which is badly damaged, people who don't have sewage, people whose water supplies are intermittent. That's really the focus. We have to get that going fast because those lives of those people are pretty miserable. So what's your homework, do you think, for the next 3 weeks? What are you focusing on? Well, I've got to make sure I finish off the Orion job properly. Making sure the lights stay on, while I'm still there and for this next period is very important. So I want to leave that properly. And then it's going to be just trying to get a vision about what's the framework, who's done this somewhere else in the world, and trying to get schooled up So actually I've got some sort of a basics about this is a priority by which I need to be doing the job when I really get in there.
Now, you've been biking around Christchurch, you biked here today. How are the roads out there?
The roads are pretty rough. And the roads are pretty congested too. So, everyone says I'm just a biker. But at the moment, I'm much more a biker because, getting around in the car can take a long time. And I guess also my life is pretty busy. And, by the time I get home tonight, I will have done a bit over an hour's worth of exercise. Haven't been to a gym,
really?
And I've been outside, so, I am a biker, yes.
So maybe it's a good opportunity for us to make Christchurch, the biking city now.
Yeah, look, if we can make it the biking city, but a lot of people want to drive their cars. A lot of people can't ride bikes. So I am a biker, and I'll be listening to the biking people, but I'll be listening to other people as well. The people who want better buses and better roads and better transport links in general. I'm not going to be a single issue guy that's going to force everybody onto their bikes.
I'm going to have to get a bike before I become a biker anyway. Now, finally, talk about the Share an Idea Expo over the weekend. What was it like getting out there and talking to people?
I was really excited. I thought the City Council had done a really fabulous job of bringing that thing together. There was a real energy there. There was a lot of people who had a lot of ideas. But there was also an openness that actually some of the ideas people had weren't necessarily going to be the best ideas as well. People have this relief that they don't have a monopoly on the best idea. But I was really excited by the people are sad about what's happened, but there was also a sense of excitement that we've actually got an opportunity to do something really better too. So I felt really good leaving it.
Great, Roger. Thank you so much for coming to the program. Best of luck in the role, and we'll see you here again sometime soon, I'm sure. Thank you. This is, of course, a very special episode of City Life, a Queen's Birthday special. And now a catch-up with the Christchurch Mayor, Bob Parker. So what's happening around the city at the moment?
Neat thing this morning, actually, just before I came here, went down to Papanui High School, and we opened the first stage of the new Graham Condon Sports and Recreation Centre, which is a unique relationship between the high school and the council and a couple of local businesses, and named after that wonderful positive spirit, Graham Condon, that we lost back in 2007. And it was glorious. His wife Kathy was there, school was there, lots of people. It was so nice to celebrate something positive, something good. It's a really tough time, and I don't need to remind anybody of that. So to stand in a hall in a brand new building that really represents the best of community cooperation and spirit at a time like this, it was a good feeling.
With the Christchurch International Airport opening the new area last week and with us today, it's so good for our city right now.
Yeah, there's some really good things happening, isn't it? These are projects that take years and years to complete, so that fate would see two significant things happening in this time is good news for all of us. I love that new domestic terminal.
I know.
It's sensational, it's just huge.
Yeah.
It's going to be great.
Yeah. Roger Sutton's appointment to CERA. Your thoughts on that?
I think it's been a tremendously astute move by the government. I think the wave of response, the positive response to it, really says everything. So I think we're very lucky to have a very, very talented, able local person in such an important role. It certainly, to me, feels like it's rebuilding trust from our community in the processes around recovery from the earthquake. So it's great. I look forward to working with Roger.
Now, we've had 5 city councillors and some business people go to San Francisco to learn some things about what happened there after the earthquake there. How important is that for the city?
Very important. We were able to do it. I was able to do a deal with Air New Zealand to get some airfares, and the councillors are paying their own costs at the other end, so there's no cost to the ratepayer there. And I've got a second group who'll be going over to Melbourne in a week or so, and it's really important, I think, that we're going to have to make some big decisions as a council. And if you're not inspired, if you haven't seen the sorts of things that I think are possible in this city in terms of good planning, good quality architecture, great community outcomes, then you haven't come to the table with all of the knowledge that you could. So for our councillors, even at the simplest level of just inspiring them, getting out of town, looking at some great thinking around urban redevelopment, that's really important. Plus there's the practical stuff, like, how did you do it? What financial tools and mechanisms did you use to achieve this? And what were the problems? If we can learn from these experiences as well as inspiring our councillors and our community, then that's got to be a really good thing. So I'm thrilled for them, and I'm looking forward to hearing a few interesting stories when they return.
Now, some things that have been happening in the city this week, we've had the coroner's inquest into the unidentified 9.
Sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
And reading in the paper this morning that, there were phone calls that had taken place maybe 2 hours after the collapse of the building. It's heartbreaking, and for the families involved, one can only begin to imagine the pain. I hope it does bring them that sense of closure that we often talk about. I don't know whether it will or not, but I really hope that in some way this helps with moving on from the extraordinary sense of loss that they must be sometimes completely overwhelmed with.
A very sad time. Now, we had Share an Idea Expo at CVS Arena over the weekend. How was that?
Well, that was amazing. We had 10,000 people over the 2 days came down, listened to lectures, took part in various sort of exercises, put forward their ideas, their visions, commented on transport, commented on public places, commented on business issues. And it's the ground floor of engagement for us. It gives us a really solid base of information, of hopes and ideas that are all being collated. And we're using, we must have in there now tens of thousands of ideas.
Gosh.
There's a very, very clever piece of software. And so all the information on the post-its and letters and every other way are typed into that system. And then we use keywords and phrases to search and to basically stack all of the information into the appropriate piles and go through the process of reading every single one of them and reducing that down again to the main strands of the rebuild, and some great ideas and great themes coming through. I don't think there's anybody I've spoken to who doesn't say, let's make sure that we build a 21st century response to the world in which we live. So, let's build a sustainable city, something that is much more in tune with the environment. Most people really want to see that feeling of the garden city flow right through into the commercial area. Low rise, most people are saying, well, we don't really feel at this stage that we want a high rise city. And it seems to fall at around 3, 4, 5, 6 stories, seems to be where people feel it should be. Great public transport, cycling, a major theme that's come through. We're cycling, we're a flat city. We used to all cycle once. Let's think about that. It's really sensible. And with energy prices inevitably rising and rising and rising, thinking about the cost of how we get to work or get to play, get to the city, whatever, is a really important part of the work that we're doing. So it's inspiring. No other word for it. It's been an inspiring few days for the city to begin the process of pulling together a vision, a collective vision, and a plan for the future.
Can we still share our ideas?
The website keeps going and it keeps evolving. So what we do is, as we begin to work through all this data and identify those themes, we'll create opportunities for people to respond to some of the ideas that have come up and to maybe begin to expand those ideas from a simple statement, I want to live in a sustainable city. What might that mean for you in a few ways? And is there a different point of view? I think we've got to hear lots of debate around this, as we are, typical Christchurch.
Yeah.
But out of this kind of hotbed of discussion, those themes will emerge and be further debated on Share an Idea, which will evolve. It's a pretty simple site at the moment, but it'll get a lot more dense with information, reports and other people's visions of what the city should be.
And finally, we've got the telethon this weekend, the Rise Up Christchurch telethon on Sunday.
So you're all ready for that?
Oh, getting ready for it. So are you going down to CBS Arena?
I will be going down there to CBS Arena, and I think it's a wonderful thing. I look at the support that's come in from overseas.
Isn't it great?
It is amazing. Yeah. That's been a theme through this thing, throughout this event. The overseas connections that we have as a country are absolutely huge. I think I think 1/5 of all Kiwis live overseas, and they still see themselves as Kiwis, and a lot of those come from here. And a lot of people want to come back, but they want to come back to something that is better than the places that they've found overseas, that is still home, but takes advantage of all the things that we have learned in the world. And I think they want to come back to a city that they can feel proud of. So the telethon is just an echo of that for me. It's about a whole bunch of people around the world saying that they care and that they too have a vested interest for whatever reason in our city being a great place. Well, we all have that.
That's
so
right.
That's what we've got to do.
Okay, so CBS Arena this Sunday between 11 a.m. and 9 p.m. and on Māori TV between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. And you can find out more information at facebook.com/Rise Up Christchurch or riseupchristchurch.org.nz. I know so much about it.
I was going to say, you've got an encyclopedic mind there.
Haven't I?
It's very impressive. But yeah, thank you for that.
Parker, thank you so much for your time. We'll see you next week.
Nice to be here.
Welcome back to the best of City Life. We've caught up with the Mayor of Christchurch, Bob Parker, the newly appointed CEO of CERA, Roger Sutton. Now it's time to hear from someone from abroad, the former Mayor of San Francisco, Art Agnos. The TEDx Christchurch conference is on tomorrow with its focus on the rebuild of our city. And I'd like to welcome one of the speakers at TEDx, the former Mayor of San Francisco, Art Agnos. Welcome to Christchurch.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
This is your first time here in Christchurch?
Absolutely, and I'm loving every minute of it, even though it's focused on some of the issues that happened through the earthquake. New Zealand is very popular in America, and we love your country, and everybody said I'm going to enjoy being here, even though it's under some difficult circumstances.
Now, you're an ideal person to come and speak at this conference because you yourself have been through a major earthquake in San Francisco in '89. So what will you be focusing on your talk?
Well, first of all, let me just say that your leadership, both at the local level with Mayor Parker as well as the City Council and the national leadership, have done an extraordinary job in the first response, bringing people out of the difficulties that the initial earthquake caused. You know, they comforted, they directed people well, they informed everybody, and I think that while the whole world was watching, they did an extraordinary job. They did all the right things. Now the tough stuff really begins because they will be making decisions for this future of this city for the next 50 to 100 years because of so many areas being damaged. A large part of the city is going to be redone. And it's important, and my message will be that it's important for them to take their time and do it right for the future of this city. The temptation often is to do it quickly and get everything going right off the bat. And clearly the necessities require that. The sewage, the water, and things like that. But how you shape this city is a very important challenge, and I hope they take their time to do it right.
When you've been driving around the city, has this brought back memories from when it happened in San Francisco?
Absolutely, big time. Frankly, your damage is worse than ours because the epicenter of the earthquake was some 20 miles away from the city, even though we had dozens of buildings, hundreds of homes fall and all the rest of it. It wasn't centered right under the city the way yours was and did so much immediate damage. And then the continuing aftershocks are even an added burden for you and your leadership. So it's a very difficult situation that brings back a lot of memories to me.
Touching on the aftershocks, I mean, are you still experiencing aftershocks from the big disaster in '89?
No, but we do have earthquakes from time to time, smaller earthquakes. But the important thing, and part of my message is, we can handle them better.
Right.
We are more confident. We are more prepared. We learned from our experience in '89 things that have enabled us to do both physically with stronger building codes. For example, in liquefaction areas, we go through the liquefaction down to bedrock when building tall buildings so that they stand up better. Nothing is perfect. Plus, the people are prepared because we have spent a lot of time training people to deal with the issues that come with an earthquake for themselves, their homes, their neighbors, and their city. We are a more confident people. That makes a difference in the attitude of the citizenry as they face the possibility of another incident.
Actually, now that you say that, we've got 5 city councillors over in San Francisco this week, along with a business delegation. You know, how important is that they're over there learning what you've gone through?
Absolutely. I think it's a very smart decision. I know there's another group of councillors that may be going to Melbourne and other. I think it's so smart for your leadership to go and see what's been done in other places so that they can take the best of what they have done and incorporate it into their planning for their city. Doesn't have to be an exact replica, but just what did they do and how would it be useful to us? I think in our city they will find some very useful things that we did that could be applied here. For example, we have trained over 21,000 citizens, not military, not police, citizens in each neighborhood of our city to be prepared to respond to an earthquake and lead their neighbors in the first 72 hours. I think that is what I'm saying gives us a sense of confidence about the future.
I'm sorry, there is building going on next door, but we are starting the rebuilding here in Christchurch.
I'm glad you're on your way. Terrific. I think that's a marvelous energy.
So this TEDx conference this weekend, how important is it for the people of Christchurch?
Well, I think that's an example of what I'm talking about, how smart Christchurch and both your local and national leadership are being in seeking the best ideas from around the world. And in this case, they're coming here to say, here's our experience, and give them a chance to listen and learn how it can be applied to Christchurch and make good decisions for the future.
Okay. What's your biggest advice to people in Christchurch right now?
My biggest advice is to not rush into decision making, to carefully consider what their choices are. This is a beautiful city. It's a historical city. And they want to figure out how to preserve the best of that while not simply going back to the status quo, but getting ready for the future. This generation of Christchurch is going to have an opportunity to do something that's never been done before since this city was started. And it's a wonderful opportunity that could leave you better, stronger, safer, and more beautiful than you ever were.
Mr. Agnos, thank you so much for coming to Christchurch, and thank you for your time on the program.
My pleasure. Good luck to you.
We'll be back after this break. We've heard from our Mayor Bob Parker, CEO of CERA, Roger Sutton, and the former Mayor of San Francisco, Art Agnos. Now let's look at the science behind the earthquakes with GNS Science. Seismologist Dr. John Ristau, who was working on analysis of the source properties of the Canterbury earthquakes and their aftershocks. Another job you do is to help keep the public informed about the science of the Canterbury earthquakes. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Why did the Christchurch earthquake and the September 2010 Darfield earthquake occur in Canterbury when it's typically a region of relatively low seismic activity?
Well, in the Canterbury area, most of the seismic activity typically does take place further west in the foothills, and then you get off towards the Alpine Fault along the west coast. But yeah, in the past, the Canterbury Plains had historically been relatively quite quiet as far as seismic activity goes. But just due to the stresses that that build up from the Pacific Plate colliding with the Australian Plate, which the South Island is sitting on. You still get all these stresses that are building up, and you have old faults that still exist throughout the Canterbury Plains that are just, they're buried, and they're hard to map and hard to know where they are. And that's where the Greendale Fault that caused the Darfield earthquake occurred on one of these buried faults. And so, these are the earthquakes of that size are actually relatively rare events. They happen maybe every few thousand years. That type of scale. It's just sort of unfortunate that we happened to be around when one actually happened.
So why was it that the February earthquake was much more damaging than the September earthquake, although it wasn't as big?
Well, it has. There are several reasons for that. First and foremost, and the most obvious one, is the fact it was much closer to Christchurch than the September earthquake was. The September earthquake was about 40 kilometers west of Christchurch, whereas the Christchurch earthquake was, only about 10 kilometers away, and was also a little bit shallower. It also had the property of it that basically that the energy that was released by the earthquake, because when an earthquake happens, energy gets basically preferentially released in certain directions where there's a lot of energy, in other directions where there's less. And for the Christchurch earthquake, it was basically directed straight at Christchurch. And another big factor with the Christchurch earthquake that we had is what we call the trampoline effect or slapdown effect, which is you have these different layers in Christchurch of the ground, soil and rock. And when the ground started to move up and down, you had the top layers, which were weaker, actually separated from the bottom layers. And then as the bottom layer started to come back down, the top layer is still going back up. And then the top layer comes back down, the bottom layer is going up, and they just slap together like that.
Okay. So why was it that the Christchurch earthquake, the February earthquake, was known as an aftershock?
You had the big earthquake in September, the 7.1, and in seismology terms, when you have like a major earthquake like that, you're obviously going to have a lot of aftershocks that come after it. And typically the biggest aftershock that you get is about a magnitude unit smaller than the main shock, so about a magnitude 6 or something like that is kind of what was expected anyways for the Darfield earthquake. And when you have a big earthquake, seismologists consider everything that comes after it in that sort of broad general region to be aftershocks until the seismic activity kind of quiets back down to the level it was before you had the big earthquake. So when the Christchurch earthquake happened, the level of seismic activity was still quite a bit higher than it always was before. So that's the way we consider an aftershock. Even though, I guess an important point, though, is to make still is that even though we call it an aftershock, all aftershocks are still earthquakes. So it was an earthquake.
Okay.
It wasn't, yeah.
Oh, that's good to know. How many aftershocks have we had? How long do you think they'll keep going for?
Well, we've had since February for the Christchurch one. We have located probably somewhere around 2,500 aftershocks.
Since February?
And
wow.
Since going back to September, since the Darfield earthquake, I think around 6,800. Something like that.
Oh
That's something that we've located, and there are probably even smaller ones that we that we haven't located. So
that's incredible.
On. Yeah, and we can probably still expect them to go on for quite a bit longer. When Darfield happened, we had said they could go on for a year, maybe even longer, because for major earthquakes like that, that's typically what you see.
Do you think there'll be another big earthquake in Christchurch?
Well, that's hard to say. We keep looking at we're looking at the data and trying to decide where different areas are going to get more or have been where stress is built up, because of these earthquakes, and where other areas where stress has been released a bit because of the earthquakes, and try and see where they're what the effect of that is. But it's kind of hard to say. It's actually pretty much almost possible to say whether there actually will be another big earthquake or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the Christchurch and the Darfield earthquakes? Do you think they'll trigger earthquakes anywhere else in New Zealand?
Well, that is a question. People have come up with that, have asked that quite a bit. And large earthquakes, like the Darfield earthquakes, they have been known, to trigger other large earthquakes, at some distance away. Because when you get an earthquake that occurs along a fault, it releases stress along that fault, but that stress doesn't just simply vanish. It gets distributed other places. So if you get another nearby fault, it can actually increase stress on that nearby fault and then trigger a major earthquake there. So with the Darfield earthquake, one of the first things we wanted to know was what effect it had on the Alpine fault. Because that fault's a big danger for for the South Island. But we quickly found that the Alpine fault was too far away for the for Darfield to have had any effect on it. So it's not likely that it'll trigger any major earthquakes anywhere else.
Okay.
Particularly anywhere as far away as Wellington or anything like that. No.
Okay. What's the current research that GNS is doing at the moment in regard to the Canterbury area?
Well, right now we're doing a lot of intensive studies of the aftershocks, and we're doing a lot of accurate relocations of the aftershocks. We get the best knowledge of where the aftershocks are occurring, and we can use that data to also get much better idea as to the structure of the ground underneath. And so we have studies going on at that. We have a lot of work going on with GPS sites, where we have which measures the very slow movement of the Earth. That you can't see with the human eye, but that happens in the course of centimeters per year, and seeing how different areas now might have changed from before Darfield and Christchurch compared to now.
Moving to a more sort of non-scientific, personal point of view, when you found out about the Canterbury earthquake and then the Christchurch earthquake, what was your immediate reaction?
Well, for the one back in September, I was the duty seismologist for that one when it happened.
Wow.
So what that means, when we have one person who's always on duty 24 hours a day. They have a pager with them, and when the system it gets when it
alerts
records,
you.
Right. If there's an earthquake somewhere in New Zealand that's likely to have been felt, it kind of triggers the system and it sets off the pager, and the duty seismologist goes and locates it. So when the Darfield earthquake happened, kind of the pager went off, and then when I actually went to go locate the data, and I could kind of see from all the different instruments that were triggered and how strongly they were triggered basically around the country, I knew it was something very, very big for that one.
Okay.
So that was my first experience with that, and then so that's when you start making the calls to all the to your boss and managers, and they start gathering people together at GNS. So that was because that one occurred at 4:30 on a Saturday morning.
Yeah,
everyone's at home. Yeah, so you have to. So like a lot of phone calls to people's homes and getting everyone to come to work.
Yeah.
The Christchurch earthquake, of course, was different because it was everyone was at work already at the time when it happened.
Yeah.
And I wasn't the duty seismologist for that one, but I did a lot of the media interviews for that on that day. Yeah.
When you saw that, the first one was a 7.1, personally, what did you think? Gosh, the destruction in Canterbury, I wonder what it's like,
Yeah, well, it was kind of hard to say. My first reaction, actually, because just before I even located it, I had sort of a general idea of where it was. And my first reaction was actually quite a bit of surprise, because if it had happened along the Alpine Fault, that's kind of what we had expected.
That's right.
And we weren't expecting anything, like that to actually happen that close to Christchurch. So there was actually quite a bit of surprise. And then, and of course, though, being based in Wellington, we had no idea what the effect on Christchurch was going to be.
Yeah.
But we knew, of course, that there would be a lot of damage anyways.
Did you keep your professional hat on, or did you call friends and family in Christchurch to see how they were?
No, you have to keep the professional hat on,
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was the response from GNS?
Well, the response was, that day is, again, getting a lot of people together to start locating all the aftershocks and to get all the information out to the media so the general public is informed. And one of the things we did too is to organize immediately sending teams of people down to Christchurch to survey the damage and get an idea of what went on there, and to also deploy a lot of temporary seismometers around to record the aftershocks so we can get even better locations. So when the Darfield earthquake happened, we had, by the afternoon, we had teams, so that happened Saturday morning. By Saturday afternoon, we had teams of people that were already organized and starting to make their way down to Christchurch with all the equipment that they would need. And then, of course, we had other people going around who were mapping the fault, because there was all for Darfield, there was all the surface trace that was exposed from that earthquake. So we had lots of people going out and making detailed maps. And for Christchurch, again, it was very much the same. Teams of people down with the seismometers, to record the aftershocks and people, to inspect the damage and that type of thing.
Was this one of the biggest earthquakes you've had to deal with?
Yes, it was. Well, probably the biggest one actually was that we had was 2009 in July 2009 in Fiordland, which was actually magnitude 7.8. But people tend to forget about that one because it didn't really cause much in the way of damage. But
you're right.
This was off in Fiordland. But as far as being a large earthquake and as far as human impact goes, and in that sense, yes, this is the biggest.
So, and just finally, I mean, this would have been such a big earthquake, you would have had a lot of media interested in what you had to say about that. How did you cope with that? Is that something you're trained in or you expect as part of the job?
Well, we do get some media training at GNS, but mostly it's it's just one of these things that you just get you get better at it over time. The more you talk to the media, you just kind of get a bit more experience with it, and with the Darfield one especially, and also with Christchurch, you did get a lot of overseas media who were interested in it too. Calls from like Australia, from Canada, from the UK. Media all over the world were interested in those earthquakes.
I certainly were.
Yeah.
It's very, very interesting what you do. Hey, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Welcome back to the Best of City Life. Christchurch has been the focus of many international media organisations. I chatted with a journalist from Channel 10 in Sydney about her time here. Christchurch has certainly been on the world stage these past few months, and our neighbours across the Tasman have been keeping a good, close eye on us, especially their media. Welcome, Danielle from Channel 10 in Sydney.
Thanks for having me.
So what has made Christchurch such an interesting story?
Well, I just think, New Zealand does feel like part of Australia, and I think when we saw the images from the quake on the day on our TV screens, everybody really felt it. And having just been through a few natural disasters of our own in terms of the Queensland floods, Cyclone Yasi, I think that people really resonated with people watching and going through it. So, of course, that is a huge news story. It was an international news story, obviously. In the UK and America, there was huge coverage. We flew in on the day after. We had to come in through Wellington, obviously, because the earthquake was... the airport wasn't open because of the quake. So, logistically, we had to sort of get in to see, and we sent a team through, and we came in a helicopter from Wellington that next morning and started to, get involved. We obviously had a lot of Australian search and rescue, police and fire crews here helping with the recovery operation, so that was sort of a focus as well. But I think mostly it was just that it felt like it was happening in a city of Australia. I think that bond between Australia and New Zealand is that close.
As a journalist, you see lots of things, but what was it like when you got here, the day after the earthquake, as a person, really?
Yeah, well, it's just awful, and I think, everyone would say the same thing. I think that seeing what people were going through, seeing just how much people had lost, I don't think I was prepared for just how decimated the CBD was. I think in Australia, as in New Zealand, that's really the heart of a city, isn't it? A capital city or a big city. And seeing the buildings down, seeing the people sort of still in there, and the survival stories, often covering sort of disaster stories like this, you get there, you see all of the destruction, and then, in the coming days, you see the stories of survival. We were there for that sort of thing as well. So I think that was really encouraging, and the heroism of the guys that were in there putting their own lives at risk and trying to pull people out. So I think that was quite confronting.
Well, what were the stories that you were covering at the time here in Christchurch?
Well, basically we sort of took an overall view. I work for a current affairs program, which isn't sort of just day-to-day news. It sort of takes a broader view as well. So what we were trying to do was talk to people about their stories. So there was, of course, a focus on Australians involved, but as I said, New Zealand, to us, it's almost the same thing. In terms of the recovery, we spoke to a lot of the search and rescue guys. We sort of did an overview and pulled out sort of people's stories about how they were suffering. And then sort of in the days to follow, we kind of went out a bit further and didn't just try to focus on the CBD, because I think a lot of the international coverage did, because that was the most visual. That was where all of the operation was sort of centred. And I think going out to Littleton, places like that, And sort of talking to people. I mean, I did a piece in that first week that we were here about how people were dealing with their children, explaining it to the children. So not necessarily all the, victims and impact like that, but also broader issues as time would go on. And we've been back a couple of times since then. We came back for the memorial when Prince William visited, and obviously we're back now coming into the 3-month anniversary.
Now, covering natural disasters isn't a new thing for you. Tell me about the other things that you've covered.
Well, I came back in January from my posting in Europe, so I was the UK correspondent for our channel in Australia. And being there, you're sort of in a bureau, so if anything happens sort of in your area, you're flicked off, and which means you cover all sorts of things, sport, entertainment, everything.
Yeah.
But one thing I remember that I sort of felt very keenly when I came back to cover the Christchurch earthquake was in 2009 in April. There was a very similar sort of earthquake in L'Aquila in Italy, April 2009, it's around Easter time, and it was a 6.3 as well. Now that earthquake happened in a sort of a medieval town, so we're talking sort of 17th century castles and 13th century basilicas, the amount of devastation, so old buildings and the history that was lost there. I noticed that comparison. There were 308 people, I think, in the end that died in the Italian earthquake, and they were sort of put up in temporary accommodation. They were in camping tents. I think the Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi famously sort of said, for those that had survived and were in this temporary accommodation, just look at it as a camping weekend. He got a lot of flack for that, which is quite controversial, man, anyway. And then we actually sort of followed through the recovery there. And I think with the aftershocks that happened straight away, there were a lot of aftershocks, obviously, in the days after Christchurch, and there were a lot of aftershocks in the days after L'Aquila as the recovery operation was coming out. And the thing I remember most was they had sort of dogs sort of helping and searching for bodies in rubble. And every time in these open spaces, before an aftershock would happen, the first you would know would be that the dogs would sort of cower and then people would sort of come out and move out to a sort of a safer area, and then sure enough, you get these earthquakes. And that sort of stuff was happening in Christchurch as well. It was the only sort of thing I could think of that was a real direct comparison. And in terms of their recovery, which I think is the interesting bit now, because obviously people of Christchurch are going through the same sort of thing, the sort of temporary accommodation, there was all sorts of problems there. But the Prime Minister, as I mentioned, Silvio Berlusconi, he then held the G8 summit that year about 3 months afterwards. So, I mean, you can imagine, would it be about this time, hosting an international summit of world leaders. And the reason he did it and moved it from, it was a seaside Sardinian town, to L'Aquila was to bring focus back on L'Aquila, to bring the international focus back and say, listen, we still need help, we still need aid. It was very odd, though, going back, being at conferences talking about these world issues in somewhere that was still dealing with these issues. So, people were still camping. President Obama was there, and they'd put a big sign up on the side of a hill where all the campers were. His catchphrase obviously was, yes, we can, and they'd written, yes, we camp.
Oh.
As he'd come through. So it was to draw attention back. I mean, I think that's sort of an interesting point.
So did that help them?
Well, I think in terms of money raised and focus, absolutely, because all too often, because we see so many of them, as time wears on, international communities forget they have their own issues.
Right.
That people are looking at Japan, people are looking at fires elsewhere and things like that. So I think these sorts of things, that's why we've come back, I guess, in this circumstance. It's important to keep across how people are doing and what's going to happen in the future. And I mean, some of the stuff we've been talking about this week, we interviewed Sutton yesterday, and he was a really energetic, really impressive guy, and his vision for Christchurch, I think, is really interesting. So it's not just about what has happened, what is happening, but what will happen in the future.
So is it still a news story in Australia?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So what's the focus really now?
I think on what will happen. I think on how people are doing, how people are recovering, and the long term. I think how Christchurch will change. I mean, I've been particularly interested in one of the stories we did was looking at infrastructure, looking at the CBD. As I mentioned before, CBDs generally, end up being the heart, and looking at the way Christchurch is changing now, because the access obviously is still restricted there, getting these satellite business districts in other places, how will that affect long-term Christchurch? Will we see, places not necessarily in a hub? So I think all that stuff's quite interesting.
Well, Danielle, thanks for coming back. Thanks for coming on the program. It's good to have you here and keeping the focus on Christchurch, because that is really important.
Thanks for having me, and good luck.
Here's an interview we did last week with one of Christchurch's best-known people, the Wizard. Welcome to City Life.
Thank you. It's my first appearance on City Life. Yes.
It's really good to see you. I must say, I haven't seen you around for a while.
I've been here all the time, although it's believed I'm not living here, I do live here actually, and I've got a house here, a very nice place on Avonside, which survived, I'm very pleased to say, in good condition. But I go down to Oamaru where my friends are and a lot of artists, and it's a beautiful place, and I love spending the summer there, but I'm here for the summer season, for the square, and I just get up a weekend. So I am living in Christchurch and always have been, and I've been in the square every summer, right through the summer from 1974 until the present. It's a very long time.
Because that was the rumour that you had headed off to Oamaru. Yeah, so you are here.
Yeah, the tourists know I'm here, but the locals don't. It's very strange that actually. The tourists turn up, but the locals say, "Thought you were in Oamaru." No, I'm still in Christchurch. But I'm seen down there, of course, and they're very thrilled to have me living there, of course.
Of course, yeah. Well, you are the Wizard of New Zealand, after all.
Yes, yes. It's like the Archbishop of Canterbury. He has a residence in Canterbury, but he's still the general top priest in the UK, and I'm the top wizard in New Zealand. Even if there aren't any official other ones yet. I just wish there were more around.
Yeah, right. Now, when I think of you, I think of your home base being Cathedral Square.
Well, yeah, as a living work of art, and that is what the art galleries recognise me as. I'm the only person in the world to have this recognition from art galleries. I have to regard all of life as a performance. And this is what Shakespeare was more or less saying. We're all acting out certain parts. And instead of just taking the part given to me by the people, I decided to write my own script and have my own part, and that requires an environment, a setting. And eventually I settled upon Cathedral Square in 1974. It is just the right place for my sort of character, which is essentially Gothic, which means hairy, a bit wild, not neat and short-haired, and not square and boxy and clean and light and airy, but spooky and weird and odd. A bit like Gotham City, Yeah. And that's why I thought Christchurch was the perfect Gothic city. It was perfect for me. Everything, lovely old bit of the Provincial Council chambers and the cathedral and the wonderful art centre. Oh, it's just a beautiful place, Christchurch.
Yeah. But now you've lost a little bit of your backdrop, and of course you're...
I don't know what's going to happen next. Is what they're going to do, because I've seen since 1950s, when it got worse, a series of large boxes have been dropped from the sky onto Christchurch with no recognition of where they're going to go end up. Gigantic, hideous things, all angles and all clean and neat and bright and shiny and ugly as hideous. So it's gradually being destroyed by these giant boxes. But a lot of these boxes are coming down, apparently, because they're so unsafe, and no one likes them anyway. And no ordinary people I know in the shops or on the street or next door neighbours like modern buildings. They don't like them at all. But the architects do, and the developers do, and the governments do. Multinationals like them, but ordinary folks don't like them at all. But I'm wondered if in the rebuild it's just going to be a repeat of the same old crap, same old rubbish, same old boxes, or whether there really is a thought about what I call the soul of Christchurch. And that's what I go to these meetings to discuss the future of Christchurch. No one mentions how it will look, what sort of soul it will have, how it will feel. And if you do build lots of nice little boxes, they could be lower boxes, they even could be wooden boxes, but there'll still be acres of plain glass, sliding ranch sliders. I can just see it now. There's millions of them all over the world, but if we went as we did originally in the 1850s, when the people who built Christchurch were radicals, they were actually rebelling against the classical tradition of columns and giant banks and huge temples of Roman. They wanted something that was more medieval, more organic, with the carvings of angels and demons and animals and plants and curls and twists. And it went on as far as the Port Hills when Seeger designed the various signs. There was also, of course, the great 1860s, 1870s period when they had this lovely Gothic arches. Then it went back to classically, and then it went modern. There is still arts and crafts, which is a branch of Gothic. And there's also the Art Nouveau, that lovely stuff in Barcelona and all those twisty things. There's also Gothic. But that's what I'd like to see. But no one's discussing the actual built appearance of Christchurch at this stage.
And this is something you're working on
So
at the
I've got a little tiny website called Save Our Soul, and I'm trying to be interested in how it'll look. And if you were a tourist, you'd want to see something that was different. And if we rebuilt in this style, I know we can't do for all the buildings, or we could recognise that maybe the boxes aren't the only shape in the world. We could have a few arches and a few curves, that we could actually attract tourists to see the rebuild itself, the stained glass being made, the mullioned windows, the beams, the new wooden structures that could be built. It'd be really interesting, but no one seems to be interested at this stage.
Okay, so saveoursoul.co.nz?
Yeah, that's just save our soul. I mean, I'm on the internet all over the place anyway as Wizard NZ, so no problem finding me there.
Check you out there. So what else are you doing around Christchurch at the moment? Are you getting out there and talking to people?
I've just come back from opening a rather unusual ablutions block at a caravan site in Queenstown.
Okay.
These people have a very strange idea of what they should build, and they've been using boilers and taps and odds and ends and trompe-l'oeil effects. Just built an oast house, and they've used bits of an old building that was around in Queenstown to make it all up, and I had to declare it officially open, as I've done many things down there.
Yeah.
The whole place is fascinating. And few months ago I was in Beijing at a film festival, and they were showing films.
Hence your outfit,
Hence my outfit. It's a bit of very nice,
I love
bright
it,
day.
yeah.
Makes a change from the gloomy black gothic stuff, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I went to the Beijing for the film festival, and the short film made about me by a friend years ago, and finally finished, won the prize for the best short documentary film.
Congratulations.
So I'm becoming better known outside these hallowed walls of Christchurch.
But you're ours, though. You can't leave us.
Oh, yeah, but I'm prepared to appear in the media,
films.
and I'm prepared to go overseas, as I used to in the 70s and 80s, to promote New Zealand.
Good.
I think it's about time that someone started using something different to promote New Zealand. It's all about bungee jumping and things for young people and adventure tourism and green stuff. Nothing about aesthetics, nothing about that New Zealanders aren't just crude, vulgar farmers who are not bungee jumpers, but actually have some soul and some character. And there's no one more peculiar and unique in the world than me, as far as I know. I've looked all over the internet. I can't find anybody else. I think I've seen it come out really weird. And that's because I'm so thoroughly part of this tradition, the Gothic tradition.
It's so good to see you. So it's good to see you in Christchurch, and it's good to know you haven't left us for
I'd like to know how I'm going to speak, though. If anyone's got any ideas out there, please let me know, because my stage is gone. Where do I perform? And where can I be that would be attractive, a nice Gothically sort of romantic area that is where tourists will go and locals can just go? I don't know.
Well, they need to let you know, or maybe let me know, and I'll pass it on to you.
I'd love to know.
Well, it's good to see you.
Thanks.
Welcome back. If you've just tuned in, City Life has only been going for 5 weeks, but we have done 200 interviews on this couch. So today we bring you the very best of City Life, the Queen's Birthday edition. Finally on the programme, what better person to speak to about the performing arts in Christchurch than Ross Gumbley. Now, Ross, with the Arts Centre out of bounds, have you actually been in there to see the damage?
Yeah, we have. We've had a very limited time to get in there, 2 people for half an hour to get the key material that we needed, which first of all was our servers, the computers, so that we could start getting the court theatre back up and running. And we've had 2 trips in for about half an hour. We're trying to negotiate a window where we'll be able to get in for a longer amount of time to get all of our kit out. But the Arts Centre now is red-stickered. It's going to be years away from being rebuilt. And so it was important that the court theatre find some sort of at least temporary solution to get us back up and running.
So what is the solution that you've come up with?
Well, we found an old shed. We're calling it the Shed in Addington. The shed really doesn't do much justice to the building, which is 80 metres long, 24 metres wide, and so it's almost 3,000 square metres of warehouse. It's an old grain store. It's fantastic. It's absolutely as strong as an ox. It's very light roof with steel frames, so it's come through both quakes without a scratch, and also by the change of use, because we change it from an old warehouse into a theatre, or will be changing into a theatre, we've had to come up to 100% of code. So what we're going to do is it's a shed in Addington, just past Tower Junction, just off sort of Whiteley Ave. We're building a theatre inside that warehouse. So it'll be 300 seats. It'll be a really similar experience to the experience that people had when they came to Court 1 in the Arts Centre. So the relationship between the stage and the audience will be very similar. However, we've been allowed to go to school, and we've actually improved the experience. So the sight lines aren't quite as wide as they were in Court One. You know, we had that sort of cinemascope stage. It was almost like watching theatre with a letterbox format.
That's right.
If it was a film, you could imagine the black lines either side of it. Well, we're not quite. Our sightline won't be quite as wide as that anymore. We've also increased the rake of the audience, because I don't remember it in Court One. If you had a very tall person in front of you, if Roger Sutton was sitting in front of you, his head would obscure the feet of the actor as they came close to the edge of the stage. So we're slightly taller, because we felt that it was important for the Court Theatre to get back up and running. That was key. But also it was important that our very loyal audience came along with a similar experience. You know, theatre traditionally and originally was a very intimate experience. It was only sort of through the Victorian period, when theatres wanted to copy Italian opera houses, that we got a proscenium arch, you know, with an orchestra pit in front of it, which is really sort of reminiscent of that Victorian idea of a stage picture, which distances you from the theatre. Now, I think theatre should be experienced as closely as it can. And so it allows us to build in this very big shed a very intimate little theatre, which is completely self-standing. We're not putting any extra stress on the building. In fact, it shores it up and takes it beyond 100% of the earthquake code. It also means we can have the whole of the Court Theatre there. We can get the workshop there. We can get the administration. We can get a rehearsal space. Also, within the building, we'll be able to have a gallery space in our foyer and a smaller little, intimate little setting with a stage on the end for concerts or stand-up. So we're really hoping that it's going to come back strong.
It sounds pretty exciting. It sounds very exciting,
It's incredibly exciting. You know, I mean, we were blessed where we were. We had a fantastic relationship between the audience and the stage in a great location. But, you know, when you get lemons, you've got to make lemonade. And the people of Christchurch want the Court Theatre to come back. You know, we've surveyed our audience and we think it's vital. Now, this is a temporary solution. It's temporary, which may mean, you know, 3 to 6 years. And we would look to be building sort of permanently within the revitalised city centre. But what's great about this is the money that we're putting into this will create a venue which the city will be able to have afterwards. So there's a long-term benefit for the city when the Court Theatre moves on. There will still be a great space which can be used by the city, because the city was short of those sort of size venues in the past. You know, we had very small spaces like, you know, the University Theatre on Ralston Ave, and we had very big spaces like the Aurora Centre and James Hay, but we didn't have much in between. So this is something that the city needed before and will always have, and it's going to be a great home for us in the time that we're there.
So what about fundraising? How are you getting money for it?
Yeah, well, excellent. Have you got a checkbook? I'm asking everybody I meet that.
Oh, really?
Well, you know, this is going to cost millions. This is going to cost us millions. We've got a healthy balance sheet. The Court Theatre's run very successfully for a number of years. So we're putting what we can into it. The government, through their agents, Creative New Zealand, have been fantastic, and they're supporting us. We're applying to every fund that we can find to get funds, and we're going to run, the fourth part of it is running a fundraising campaign. So if people want to help out, they can go to our website. We're launching the fundraising campaign very shortly. So if they want to help, they can go to www.courttheatre.org.
Great. Now, I bought my entertainment book last year from the Court Theatre. And I think the Court Theatre Supporters Group is doing that again this year.
They are.
So there's a start.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you know, our supporters are fantastic. We're blessed as an organisation by the loyalty that we have from our audience and especially from the supporters who work so hard for this theatre. I'm always incredibly moved. We've just had the supporters' annual general meeting, and the amount of work that they do, they give certificates for work. And so if you've been an usher for 5 years or worked front of house, you get a certificate. 10 years, you get a certificate. 15 years, you get a certificate, I think, and a badge. 20 years, a certificate. And it went on until we got up to 40 years.
Oh, gosh.
4 people have given 40 years' service
to
the front of house. It is, and it's that loyalty. It's also something that we're aware of, that I think when you're producing theatre, you know, a lot of artists, I think, can be incredibly insular. But if you're producing theatre, it is the great collaborative art form. And you have to remember that it's for an audience, because theatre doesn't exist unless it's, you know, 8 o'clock, curtain up, from people watching and
right.
something happening.
Yeah.
And that's where theatre exists.
Now let's look at your actors. I had one of your actors, Nick Kyle, on the program last week, maybe the week before, talking about a new play that he's in, The Importance of Being Earnest.
Yes.
Now he was saying that actors have left Christchurch. What's happening? How are you going to bring people back?
Well, actors have always left Christchurch. You know, if they didn't have work, they'd go somewhere else and find it. They're an itinerant bunch and always have been. You know, they're essentially travelling players. Don't trust them. Don't trust them. Don't give them any money at all. You know, that's what they do.
Yeah.
That's part of the lifestyle. If you want to be a professional, you have to go where the work is. And so they're not here at the moment because there isn't any work.
I
you know,
know.
it's great that people like Nick is creating work for himself.
That's right, he is.
You know, that's brilliant. And that's another reason that we have to get back up and running. If we're back up and running, and we will be before the end of the year, we'll be offering that work to actors and
Great.
they will return. Not all actors have left, I'll point out.
Okay.
But a lot of actors have. Why it's important for us to get back up and running is that it's not only actors who by their nature are itinerant and move around. That's what they do. It's important that we get up and running because all the designers, the lighting designers, all the people that go to actually creating a play, which quite often, you know, our audience may never think of, but it's crucial that we give them some form of employment because in a lot of cases it's a lot harder for them to move around the country and find work elsewhere.
What can we look forward to coming up at the Court Theatre when it reopens?
Well, before we reopen in the Shed in Addington, we have a season at the Aurora Centre in July of a wonderful comedy called Five Women Wearing the Same Dress. By Alan Ball.
Sounds good.
It's about bridesmaids.
All right.
It's great, isn't it? I love it when you get that pun.
Yeah.
The sort of the sensibility that created the title has gone into the script. You know Alan Ball, who wrote 6 Feet Under and
Yes.
American Beauty, has written this fantastic stage
I
play
have to see
about
it.
bridesmaids. It's gorgeous. It's a co-production which we were working on with the Fortune Theatre. It was going to play in Christchurch originally at Court 1 and then go down to the Fortune. Well, now it's starting in the Fortune and coming up and playing a very limited season at the Aurora Centre. So we have that to look forward to.
Great.
We'll also have Hansel and Gretel in the school holidays there. So we're getting back up and running before that. And then we're going to open the theatre before the end of the year, hopefully in November, with Roger Hall's new play, A Shortcut to Happiness.
Wow.
The Court Theatre's never premiered a Roger Hall play, which seems extraordinary, but we're going to premiere this one. We're going to be the first theatre in the country to do it.
This is great.
I
Good
hope
news.
so.
It's good news
I
for
think
Christchurch.
So. Well, yeah, it is. You know, we need a few more goodwill stories coming out, and you know, we're going to work as hard as we can, but we're going to need our audience's support.
Yep.
You know, we're going to come knocking.
We're there.
We have to, and it's the sort of thing that if the people of Christchurch want, we're going to have to find a way to pay for this.
Okay, Ross. We're there. I'm behind you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on the program.
You're welcome.
That is City Life for today, our special Queen's Birthday edition. You can, of course, get in touch with us, connetta@ctv.co.nz, call us 3777 033, or write to us, PO Box 1100 Christchurch. We'll see you tomorrow, and thanks for watching.